The church was full. All the guests were listening as the priest smiled at Benita and brought the microphone closer to her mouth. "Say your vows," he said gently. Benita opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She tried again. Her lips moved, but no sound followed. "Benita," the groom called out. Paul, the groom, who was handsomely dressed in an impeccable black suit, was now sweating like a chicken on Christmas Day. Whispers spread like fire. Had she suddenly turned deaf and dumb? Is she bewitched? Someone shouted. "Benita, please say something," the groom pleaded. The chaos had just begun. Once upon a time, before this day of shame, Paul had been hopelessly in love with another woman called Esther. They loved each other for years. Paul was a welder in Lagos. He made small money, barely enough to feed himself. Esther was a fashion designer who sold some of her creations on social media. Sometimes she gave Paul transport fare when things were really tight for him financially. Sometimes she cooked for both of them. She was what most people refer to as the understanding girlfriend until luck smiled on her. One day, one of Esther's outfits ended up on a Nollywood actress, but the actress refused to give Esther credit. The matter went viral online and people defended Esther. Suddenly, she became known everywhere. Her small tailoring shop became a brand. Celebrities came to her. Money flowed in. But with money came pride. Esther moved out of the little apartment she had shared with Paul. She told him that the apartment no longer fitted her new status and that she had to move out. Paul suggested that they both move into her new apartment, but Esther declined. She told Paul that she was now a celebrity and it was not good for her brand if she cohabitated with a man she wasn't married to. And that sowed a seed in Paul's mind that was going to bear fruit at the wrong time. One evening, Esther had organized a star-studded fashion show. The Who is Who were in attendance and Esther felt she was walking on clouds. But things were about to go really wrong. The lights inside the event hall shimmered like falling stars. Cameras flashed from every corner, capturing every detail of Esther's dazzling fashion show. Models draped in shimmering gowns strutted along the runway, and Esther in her perfectly tailored red dress stood at the end, basking in the applause. The music softened and the MC called her to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, the woman behind today's magic, Esther Daniel." The hall erupted in cheers. Esther smiled, waving gracefully, soaking in the attention. She was the star of the moment. But just as she adjusted the microphone to give her closing speech, the crowd stirred. Murmurs spread like wildfire. At first, she thought it was just another celebrity arrival, until she looked down. There he was, Paul, sweaty, nervous, in a suit that hung awkwardly on his frame. He was on one knee and he held up a small velvet box, the kind sold at roadside stalls. People gasped while Esther froze. "Esther, my love, my sunshine, we have been together for years. You have supported me, stood by me, and I know I don't have much, but I promise to give you my whole heart. Will you marry me?" The crowd erupted in screams, some clapping, some laughing. Phones were lifted higher to record every second. Esther's throat tightened. Her fingers twitched nervously at her side. She could feel hundreds of eyes drilling into her, waiting for her answer. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, she just stared horrified. Laughter rippled across the hall. Paul's face flushed, but he held the ring higher, desperate. "Esther, please, say yes. Let's build the future we dreamed of." But Esther's silence was louder than rejection. She shook her head slowly, her cheeks burning with embarrassment, and then, in one swift motion, she turned away. The camera followed her every step as she walked off the stage, leaving Paul kneeling alone, humiliated under the spotlight. The internet had its story. By the next morning, Esther's name trended worldwide, not for her designs, but for the viral video of her walking away from the poor welder boyfriend who dared to propose. Esther simply told Paul that they were now worlds apart and were no longer compatible. The viral video of Esther walking away from Paul's proposal haunted him everywhere he turned. His workshop became a ghost town. The neighbors who once praised him for being a hard-working welder now mocked him quietly. Some even laughed openly. Now fashion designer Paul won't marry. You know rich. Paul buried himself in his welding work, but his spirit was broken. For weeks, he couldn't look people in the eye. One evening, after a long day of fixing gates and welding iron chairs, Paul walked into a small roadside restaurant to eat. That was where he saw her, Benita. She wasn't flashy. She wore a simple blue gown. She was reading a book while sipping palm wine. Paul didn't know who she was, but there was something about her calmness that drew him in. He sat 2 tables away and stole glances at her. When his food was served, the waiter accidentally spilled soup on his trousers. Embarrassed, Paul muttered an apology, though he wasn't at fault. Benita looked up, smiled and said softly, "You're too quick to apologize. It wasn't your fault." That was their first conversation. Over the following weeks, Paul and Benita met at the same restaurant, sometimes by accident, sometimes by plan. Slowly, Paul learned that she was a writer, not just any writer, but a wealthy award-winning author who had published books internationally. She was doing research for her next book, and that was why she had been visiting that side of town and eating in that restaurant. I need to immerse myself in the lifestyle I want to portray in my book. That is my style of writing, she had said to Paul. She was so down to earth and hated the spotlight. Unlike Esther, Benita wasn't on social media, so she did not know of Paul's failed engagement. Benita noticed Paul's humility, his determination, and how he never complained despite his struggles. She was touched. One day, Paul finally opened up about his failed engagement and how Esther had dumped him. He spoke without bitterness, only quiet pain. Benita listened, then said, "Paul, your worth isn't tied to what someone else thinks of you. You are bigger than welding. You are a builder. You can build an empire if you want." That night, Benita gave him her card and told him to meet her at her office. When Paul arrived at her office, she surprised him with an investment offer to start a real estate business. At first, Paul resisted. "I don't want to be a burden." But Benita replied, "You're not a burden, Paul. This is a good opportunity for you to elevate yourself." And just like that, Paul's new life began. Paul's real estate business grew in leaps and bounds. And so did the relationship between Paul and Benita. He never rushed her, and Benita respected his quiet strength. And slowly but surely, love began to blossom between them. Paul never forgot the stink of public humiliation, so when he decided to propose to Benita, he did it in the most private, intimate way. It was a quiet evening, just the two of them, a dinner on a balcony overlooking the city. Paul knelt, heart racing, and whispered, "Benita, you took me when I was broken. You saw a man where everyone else saw a failure. Will you marry me?" Benita's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Yes, Paul, 1,000 times." The next morning, social media exploded again, this time with the headline, "Ex-welder, now billionaire, meets his bride-to-be." When news broke of Paul's engagement, Esther was one of the first to call. She had climbed even higher in fame, but her voice trembled when she said, "Paul, congratulations. I am so sorry for how I treated you. You didn't deserve that. Please forgive me." Paul smiled gently. "Esther, there are no hard feelings. That day made me who I am now. Thank you." Touched by his forgiveness, Esther offered to design Paul's fiancée's wedding dress. "Don't worry, I will design the best dress you've ever seen. It will be the talk of Africa." Paul didn't know it wouldn't be in a good way, but he accepted.
If you're enjoying this story, please do give me a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel if you haven't for more interesting African tales from me. Back to the story.
After the news of Paul's engagement to Benita went viral, Esther's world started to crumble. The internet, which had once praised her, now turned against her. Social media was flooded with posts mocking her. A video titled "The Welder Who Became a Billionaire" was trending, and every comment section was full of people trolling Esther. "She left a diamond for a stone. Now look," one person wrote. "He went from a fashion designer to a famous author. Talk about an upgrade," another added. Esther watched her likes and positive comments disappear, replaced by hateful messages and laughing emojis. Her once glowing celebrity status was now a public spectacle of her past mistakes. The bitterness inside her grew, and she found herself consumed by a burning anger. She felt as though she had invested a lot into Paul's life, and she deserved to be standing next to him and not another woman. She didn't care if it was the other woman that was responsible for Paul's new status. One afternoon, Esther was in her office, scrolling through the comments, tears streaming down her face, when a close friend of hers, a well-known blogger named Kiki, walked in and saw her. "Esther, what is wrong with you? Why are you crying over these people?" Kiki asked, seeing the phone in her hand. "Look at this, Kiki," Esther sobbed, showing her the screen. "They are all laughing at me. Paul is getting married and they are all saying his new wife is 1,000 times better than me." Kiki's face hardened. She took Esther's hand. "This isn't about them. This is about you. You let him go and now he's with someone else." She leaned in close and whispered, "But what if I told you there's a way to fix it? A way to get him back. A way to show everyone that he's still yours." Esther looked at her friend, her eyes wide with hope and desperation. Kiki pulled a small bag from her purse. Inside were a handful of shimmering dark beads. "Make these beads a part of her wedding dress," Kiki explained. "On the day of the wedding, they will cause chaos. The marriage will not happen. He will see that no one else can truly make him happy. Then you can step in. Paul will be yours again." With trembling hands, Esther took the beads. The anger and shame she felt gave way to a new dangerous kind of hope. The thought of getting Paul back, of winning against the woman who had replaced her, filled her with a powerful, bitter joy. On the wedding day, Benita wore the gown proudly. She looked stunning. Guests clapped, but as she walked down the aisle, something strange happened. Her legs trembled and her voice shook. Benita couldn't say her vows. The church became completely silent. The quiet gasps of the guests sounded like they did on that terrible day Paul never wanted to remember, the day he had proposed to Esther at her fashion show. He looked at Benita. Her eyes were wide with fear and her lips moving without a sound. Then he saw Esther sitting in the front row with a faint, knowing smile on her face. It was the same proud smile she had on her face at her fashion show. Paul's heart raced. He knew this wasn't an accident. Esther had planned it. The priest, a man of strong faith, looked at Benita. He didn't spray over her dress. Instead, he simply took her hand. God's love is a light that chases away all darkness, he said, his voice loud and clear. And what is hidden will be revealed. As he spoke, a single bright beam of sunlight coming from a high, colorful window shone directly on Esther. The light just didn't light her up. It seemed to focus on her, making her glow. Everyone in the church gasped. Benita's wedding dress started to glow with a soft, beautiful light. The shining fabric seemed to move, as if shaking something invisible. The small beads on the top of the dress, the very ones Esther had sewn in, rattled, and they fell to the ground one by one, like tiny stones. The dress suddenly felt lighter and pure. At that exact moment, a scream tore through the air. It wasn't from Benita, but from Esther. She stood up, grabbing her throat, her face full of pain. She tried to speak, to yell, but no words came out. It was as if the charm she had made, now broken, had bounced back, becoming a curse on its creator. Her voice was gone. Benita, who could now breathe and speak, looked at Esther with pity, not anger. "Esther, why?" she whispered. But Esther couldn't speak. She could only stare at her hands with shock. The charm had given her a moment of terrible power, but its end had taken from her what she cared about most, her voice. Some people pointed at her. Others whispered about black magic and a woman who had tried to cause someone else's happiness. The priest, his voice calm, simply turned back to Paul and Benita. "Let us continue," he said. Benita looked at Paul, her eyes full of love and new strength. "If you accept this man, say I do." "I do," she said, her voice clear and true. The crowd cheered and the sun returned, filling the church with light. Later, as Paul and Benita danced, happy and free, Esther stood alone in a corner, unable to make a sound. The silence that had once shamed Paul had now become her lasting companion. She had lost everything she had built with her pride, and in its place she had found a humility that she would carry for the rest of her silent life. Paul and Benita danced surrounded by light, a sign of love that had survived the storm. Pride goes before a fall, and the evil that we plot for others often ends up harming us instead. Esther's desire for revenge and her belief that she was entitled to Paul's success led her to use a dark charm against Benita. However, the curse she created ultimately came back to her, taking away her voice. Benita's quiet grace and Paul's unwavering love, on the other hand, were their greatest strength, protecting them from harm. In the end, Esther's silence became a permanent reminder of her wrong choices. If you enjoyed this story, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, and share this story with a friend or two. Click on this video on the screen to enjoy more African tales from me. See you there.